Hi there and welcome back. I've discussed my love of Ella Fitzgerald before, and certainly in her orbit but spinning in the R&B soul section is Aretha Franklin. Both Aretha and Ella having deep gospel roots. Aretha is right up there with Ella for being one of my favorite vocalists. Best known for her later work on Atlantic Records, today I'd like to take a look at her 1961 Columbia Records debut album, simply titled Aretha. Today on Doug's Music Fun channel. Yes sir, you betcha, fun. Aretha Franklin, son of the well-known Reverend C.L. Franklin, is a towering figure in music. There are many biographies of her published, so I will give a short background of Ms. Franklin to provide a little context for the release of her first secular album titled Aretha. Other musicians had fathers who were preachers, including one of Aretha's biggest influences, Sam Cooke. However, those fathers didn't have recording careers like Aretha's father did. C.L. Franklin was also a social activist and friend of Martin Luther King Jr. There has always been a tension between the blues, jazz, other secular music, and gospel music in our culture, but C.L. Franklin is reported to have been one of the very few preachers who embraced all music. B.B. King relates in David Ritz's book, Respect, The Life of Aretha Franklin, how B.B. King attended C.L. Franklin's sermons for years and how C.L.'s sermons were being sold alongside his blues records. He spoke of C.L. coming to see him in clubs, referring to him as, quote, everyone's preacher. There are biographies of C.L. Franklin apart from his more famous daughter, and it's certainly not all positive, especially with the way he treated women. I bring up his attitude towards music to illustrate how a preacher father and a talented daughter, both rooted in gospel, could decide to make secular records so quickly and easily. The starkest example of what can occur when a preacher father doesn't approve of his offspring's secular leanings is illustrated by the killing of Marvin Gaye Jr. by his father. Although there probably were other factors involved in Marvin Gaye Jr.'s death, Marvin Sr. was never quiet about his displeasure with Jr. straying from the path, going so far as to warn Marvin Jr. about what can happen when one strays from the path following the shooting of Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke, incidentally, also had a preacher father and sang gospel in his youth. Aretha's mother, Barbara, left her father with her son Vaughn and moved to Buffalo when Aretha was 6. The remaining children stayed behind in Detroit with C.L. and Big Mama, Aretha's grandmother, Rachel Franklin, who ran the household. Mahalia Jackson, incidentally, was also a friend of the Franklins and helped with the household as well. Barbara would travel to Detroit to see her kids, and the kids would travel to Buffalo in the summer. When Aretha was 10, her mother died of a heart attack. By several accounts, including all of her children, their mother was an amazing woman with a beautiful voice who helped to impart a love for music on Aretha. They were very close. Quoting from Ritz's biography, Ruth Bowen, Aretha's booking agent, said Frank, she called Aretha's father Frank, Frank told me that he was afraid that Aretha wouldn't ever recover, that she was unable to talk for weeks. She crawled into a shell and didn't come out until many years later. What brought her out, of course, was the music. I'm not sure Aretha would have ever found her way out of the shell without music. I don't want to turn this into another biography of Ms. Franklin, but it is a fascinating story, however, and I recommend Ritz's book highly. So let's fast forward a few years through ever-growing talent, the rising fame of her father and herself on the gospel circuit, and pregnancies when she was 12, giving birth to her son Clarence, and 16 when she gave birth to her son Thomas. Chess Records in Chicago began distributing C.L. Franklin's sermons nationwide, and is the first time Aretha was listed as a recording artist in 1956. Aretha loved and witnessed Sam Cooke's crossover from gospel to secular and his rise to stardom. Other crossover musicians at the time included Ray Charles, Nat King Cole, and others. She had an ambitious streak, everyone knew she had incredible talent, and the looming question was how to launch her own crossover career. Barry Gordon of then smaller Motown was interested in her, but due to Duke Ellington, Johnny Mathis, and perhaps most notably, Mahalia Jackson recording for Columbia, C.L. decided Aretha needed to get out of Detroit while also feeling that Motown wasn't a big enough label for her. Motown had signed Smokey Robinson at that point, but that was about it. The label was much smaller then. With Columbia, it was either going to be a short-term move to New York or Los Angeles, and California felt too far away, so they went to New York. Eventually, Aretha made a demo with Major Holly, a renowned bass player, to submit to the CBS producer John Hammond. John Hammond heard the demo and immediately signed her to Columbia and produced this first record. Hammond has since discussed that he wished he did not have to be in a rush with her first album, and how he saw Aretha as a jazz and blues artist, not R&B. C.L. Franklin was in a rush to book her into jazz clubs and needed a product. Meanwhile, Sam Cooke was pushing RCA to sign her. Hammond felt they needed to get her signed and a record produced ASAP, fearing he might lose her to another label. Hammond felt she was so talented that she could sing anything. He hired Ray Bryant, a jazz blues pianist also with gospel roots. Aretha was very fond of Ray and his playing, and the two got along. Hammond hired J. Leslie McFarland as an arranger, and McFarland also wrote or co-wrote 6 of the songs on the record. Hammond hired the rest of the musicians, and they were off. Here are the musicians on the record: Aretha Franklin, piano and vocals; Bill Lee, bass; Ray Bryant, piano; Tyree Glenn, trombone; Ozzie Johnson on drums; Chauncey Westbrook on guitar; Al Sears on tenor saxophone; Quentin Jackson on trombone; Milt Hinton on bass; and Skeeter Best on guitar. I'm not going to dive deeply into each track, but would like to make some select comments. The opening track, Won't Be Long, doesn't waste any time displaying the fire and power of Ms. Aretha, a growling low, then arching up to a gospel fervor as the notes climb. It's a barn burner of a song. Used, incidentally, in the 2nd season of Netflix's The Umbrella Academy. Next up is the out-of-place yet glorious standard of Over the Rainbow. Aretha sings it beautifully, and since I do love the song, I'm quite fond of her version. Hammond felt it was out of place and didn't want to do it, but C.L. and Aretha insisted. Hammond notes in Ritz's biography that, quote, they wanted to reach a wider audience and thought paying tribute to Judy Garland was the way to do it. I capitulated, end quote. I believe it is out of tone with the rest of the album as well, but as a result, it's a highlight for me and the main reason I love this album so much. One eyebrow raiser on the record is the song It Ain't Necessarily So from Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. It raised my eyebrows because it could be considered blasphemous, especially by her father. Here's a snippet from the lyrics. the things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Hammond suggested this song because Gershwin, quote, deeply understood the blues idiom and together with his brother Ira's witty lyrics wrote sterling vehicles for black voices, end quote. He relates how he was worried about the lyrics, but, quote, Reverend Franklin had not the least concern. He told me how much he admired the Gershwins, end quote. Hammond also didn't want to include a gospel song, but again was overruled, and Are You Sure from the musical The Unsinkable Molly Brown was recorded. Hammond thought it was, quote, anemic. I wanted something much closer to what Aretha had been singing in church, but again, I was outvoted. Their goal was to cover all the bases. My goal was to capture the essence of this remarkable young talent. With the exceptions of a few songs, I'm afraid I didn't do that, end quote. I agree with Hammond on this one. Are You Sure is a bit anemic, and I do think a more traditional gospel tune would have served the album better, but it's still great in my humble opinion. You know the joke that relates how pizza is like sex? Even when it's bad, it's still good? Well, even a bad Aretha Franklin is still good to my ears. Hammond discussed one of the songs that he felt he did have success with, Today I Sing the Blues. Hammond commented in Ritz's biography that the song, quote, became a classic and remained in her repertoire even when she changed labels. If you listen to it, you aren't hearing a singer in search of a style, she's found it, end quote. Perhaps I'm too forgiving, but hearing Aretha singing anything is a pleasure to me, and although I understand and agree with the criticism that the songs are somewhat disconnected, I still think it's a fantastic listen. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I wanted to shed some light on her non-Atlantic recordings, which I think are underappreciated. However, like most everyone else, I too love her Atlantic recordings and hope to delve into them soon as well. So, thank you so much for coming along on this exploration. See you next time.